You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Feel like who art Ed?
We tried to slice it.
Who art is Mr. Wood art Ed me?
Good. Either way, it's ambiguous. It works on so many levels.
I know.
That's not too great to start.
Welcome to Who Arted, weekly art history for all ages. I'm your host, Kyle Wood, and today we're going to be looking at the life and work of Anatsui. Now, this is one of the fan requests I got for this year's Arts Madness tournament. I want to remind everybody I'm doing daily episodes right now through January and February as we get ready for this year's annual Arts Madness tournament. It seems like a lot of these requests might have come from teachers or students who have AP art history on the brain, because I'm noticing that Anatsui and many of the other artists requested are on the AP art history curriculum list. So this year's tournament should be pretty good for those trying to cram for the test. And for any AP art history students across the US who are studying for the test, check out the links in the show notes, because I've covered a lot of the curriculum on my AP art history cram session Spotify playlist. Now, on to the actual topic for today. Anatsui. He was born in 1944 in Anyako, a town in the Volta region of Ghana. At the time, Ghana was still a British colony known as the Gold Coast. He grew up during the vibrant but turbulent years leading up to independence, when African nations were reclaiming their identities from colonial powers. Anatsui trained at the College of Art in Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology in Kumasi, Ghana. The thing is, the art curriculum there was still very Western-centric. Students there were taught to look at art through European eyes, studying Michelangelo and Picasso, while often ignoring the rich artistic traditions right in their own backyard. And, I mean, the emphasis on Picasso's work in Africa seems really painfully ironic. This tension between Western education and African heritage would become a central theme in his life and work. In 1975, Anatsui relocated to Nigeria to teach at the University of Nigeria, Nsukka. Here, he joined the Nsukka group, a collective of artists who were determined to break free from the Western art styles. They looked to uli, a traditional Igbo practice of body and wall painting characterized by fluid linear drawing. Anatsui began experimenting with wood, using chainsaws to slash and burn logs, creating sculptures that looked like ancient weathered artifacts. His biggest breakthrough came almost by accident as he was out for a walk one day. It was the late 1990s, and Anatsui was walking near his home in Nsukka when he stumbled upon a large plastic bag filled with discarded bottle caps. They were the aluminum screw tops from liquor bottles, and he says he didn't know why, but he felt compelled to take them. And he dragged them back to his studio, where they sat basically untouched for months, but he eventually began examining the caps, and he noticed the brand names, distinct Nigerian liquors like Dark Sailor and Black Gold. He realized it wasn't ordinary trash. This was kind of evidence of the triangle trade. For those unfamiliar, for centuries, European traders had shipped alcohol to Africa. It was used as currency to trade for goods and enslaved people who were then shipped to the Americas. Alcohol was a tool of colonialism. By using these specific bottle caps, Anatsui realized he could visually connect the three continents, Africa, Europe, and the Americas. And using this material could provide commentary on the history of slavery, consumerism, and trade. He began flattening the caps into strips and wiring them together with copper, but he didn't do this alone. There's a tradition with Kente cloth in Ghana where it's woven by groups of weavers working in unison, and Anatsui turned his studio into a communal space. He hired dozens of assistants from local towns to help flatten, twist, and stitch the metal. And even this process is meaningful as it transforms the act of art making from that sort of solitary Western idea into a communal African one. The result was something new and different. These weren't normal stiff statues, they were fluid. Anatsui calls this concept non-fixed form. He decided his work shouldn't have a rigid shape like a bronze soldier or horse. Instead, his metal sheets are folded, draped, and scrunched differently every time they're displayed. It gives the sculptures a fluid composition and kind of gives it a whole new life with every display. It also means that he, as the artist, was giving up some amount of control, allowing curators to arrange the work however they see fit. And in some ways, this kind of reflects the reality of life in West Africa and life in general. It's constantly changing, evolving, and adapting. Now, today I want to look at one of his most famous works, the 2003 piece called Old Man's Cloth. If you were looking at this in the museum, probably one of the first things you'd notice is it is massive. It's about 16 feet by 17 feet. And from a distance, it looks almost like a luxurious, heavy tapestry. We see these bright metallic golds, blacks, and reds shimmering in the folds and the ripples of what appears to be the cloth. It looks soft. It looks like something you could wrap around your shoulders. But as you step closer, you see that's not the case. The gold is actually thousands of flattened liquor bottleneck wrappers. The, quote, fabric is sharp metal and copper wire. The edges aren't hemmed and neat. They're jagged and irregular. And this is all obviously intentional. Mimicking the aesthetic of textiles is a reference to an important part of his culture, the cloth. The title Old Man's Cloth is actually quite revealing. In Ghana, textiles are a major form of communication. Specific patterns and styles of cloth are associated with proverbs, events, and status. An old man in this context would imply wisdom, authority, and preservation of history, but there's another meaning here. And in many West African traditions, alcohol is used for libations, a ritual with liquid poured out onto the ground to honor and communicate with ancestors. So Old Man's Cloth is kind of a bridge between the ancestral spirit world with the reference to libations and the modern physical world with the mass-produced items. It's also a bridge between the history of the Gold Coast with the gold colors and the dark history of the slave trade represented with the liquor caps. And one of the things that strikes a lot of viewers is a somewhat similarity in the composition between this work and Kente cloth. Kente is famously created by sewing together narrow strips of woven fabric. Anatsui builds his sculpture the same way, creating blocks of metal strips that are stitched together. But while Kente is smooth and comforting, Old Man's Cloth is rough and jagged. And this roughness is really central to the story. He's suggesting the history of Africa is not smooth. It's been cut, crumpled, and stitched back together through colonialization, independence, and globalization. When a museum installs the piece, they're instructed to let it ripple and fold to create deep shadows and bright highlights. It occupies a massive space, almost aggressively asserting its presence. Old Man's Cloth is considered a masterpiece today, not just because of the beautiful aesthetic of it, but because it's able to so simply and elegantly embody all these paradoxes. It finds beauty in a painful history and creates value out of waste. But most importantly, it's not static. It's living, changing, adapting to new environments. It's uncomfortable, but also has the ability to change, and there are glimmers of real beauty in all of it. This concludes this week's episode of Who Arted, part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. If you found this tolerable, please leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast app. You can find images of the work being discussed this week and every week on social media at Who Arted Podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, and of course on the website whoartedpodcast.com. Podcast done.